Welcome to solverfy.
To describe the composition or makeup of a chemical compound or a molecule, there are three different ways in which we can describe the elements present. The first is called the empirical formula, which is the lowest whole number ratio of moles of each element in a compound. So, for example, a compound might have an empirical formula of CH3. This means for every mole of carbon, there are 3 moles of hydrogen. The molecular formula is the actual ratio of moles of each element in a compound, and it's usually a multiple of the empirical formula. So a molecular formula for a compound that exists is C2H6. And you can see that this means that there are 2 moles of carbon and 6 moles of hydrogen in 1 mole of the compound. And you can see this is a multiple of the empirical formula. Finally, a structural formula is a picture or a drawing that shows how everything is arranged in the atom. So this is usually the molecular formula, but drawn as a picture. So this would be an example of a structural formula, where you have 2 carbons and 6 hydrogens around each carbon. So the question is, what information do you need to have to determine the molecular formula? If you know the number of moles of each type of atom in a sample of compound, this is only enough to tell you the empirical formula. So A is not enough information. If you have the mass of each element and the total number of atoms in a molecule of the compound, you can use this information to find the molecular formula. The first step is to take the mass of each element and change it to moles. And you do this by using the molar mass. Once you have the moles of each element, you can find the ratio. And this allows you to write the empirical formula. To find the molecular formula, we have to compare the total number of atoms in the empirical formula to the total number of atoms in the molecule. So after you've found the empirical formula, we find total number of atoms in the molecule divided by the atoms in the empirical formula. This gives us the multiplier. And then you can find the molecular formula. Similarly, if you have the mass of each element and the total number of atoms of only one element, we can still use that to find the ratio of the empirical formula to molecular formula. So C also gives us enough information. Follow the same steps to find the empirical formula. And then we can find the ratio between the number of atoms of one element in the empirical formula and the atoms of one element in a molecule. And this again gives us the multiplier to find the molecular formula. If we know the empirical formula and mass of each element, that is not enough information to find the ratio between molecular and empirical formula. Finally, given a structural formula, this is perhaps the most informative, and you can use it to find the molecular formula. And you do this simply by counting up the number of each atom present.